Pokemon breeding, the art of creating new life via mysteriously obtained eggs. How does it work? What can you change? Should I even bother? Let's talk about it. Breeding is a part of Pokemon that has been around for a really long time, like pre-year 2000 long time. It's also an aspect of Pokemon that a lot of people don't fully understand. My friends certainly don't, which is weird to me, as I've been breeding Mons since the Emerald days. Pokemon breeding is one of my passions in these games, so I've decided to make a guide explaining all the aspects of breeding from start to finish, everything you can affect, and how exactly to go about it. A few things to note before I jump into the technical stuff. This guide is specifically made for Scarlet and Violet. Certain things I explain will not apply to other games, and especially not to previous generations. This is very much an educational video, and you may very well know everything about certain parts of this process. I have timestamps for the sections, so feel free to skip around to what you want to know. My channel also features smaller, bite-sized lessons for each of these sections, which are more focused on the practical application of that part. If you're not into super detailed, nearly lecture-level learning, those videos will probably be more useful for you. This is the culmination of all my breeding knowledge, meant to be a convenient and useful guide to help you become a breeding master too. I think the best way to break this down is by starting with the simple method of breeding and then going into the more complex aspects after that. So here we go. In general, breeding has 5 steps. 1. Pick a target Pokemon. 2. Obtain a parent Pokemon of the target species or its evolutionary line. 3. Obtain a compatible breeding partner. 4. Picnic to create an egg. And finally, 5. Hatch the target Pokemon. Picking the target Pokemon, the one you want to receive. This step is a make or break moment in this process, as some Pokemon are more difficult than others to create, while others are straight up impossible to obtain via breeding. This is because every Pokemon in the game has a hidden characteristic called an egg group. While there's no in-game way to check this, there are a lot of online resources that have the information listed. I personally use Therapy.net or PokemonDB.net for research. There are links to the Scarvy Pokedexes for both in the description. Pokemon can only breed with other Pokemon that are in one of its egg groups and that are of the opposite gender. Much like how dogs in real life can breed with other dogs of different breeds, even though they look very different. Unlike reality, all breedable Pokemon, regardless of gender, can also make eggs with Ditto, which has an egg group all its own. The Pokemon that are not breedable and therefore cannot produce eggs fall in the undiscovered egg group. These include mostly legendary, mythical, or baby Pokemon, as well as the paradox Pokemon. What you choose as a target can alter the way in which you have to go about breeding, but for the most part, so long as your Pokemon is found in the wild or as a starter, its egg group probably won't be an issue. I did a poll on my community tab for the purpose of this video, the winner of which was Zorua. Zorua is in the field egg group, so it can breed with any Pokemon that is also in the field group, as well as Ditto. A subpoint in this section, if you choose a Pokemon that has multiple forms, like our Zorua, which has a Unova form and a Hisuian form, it will be necessary to know which is native to the region you are in. Unova Zorua is naturally in Paldea, so using basic breeding will give us Unova Zorua. We'll need to do a more complex version of breeding to get Hisuian Zorua, and that is explained in a later section. For now, we are sticking to the basics. Obtain a parent Pokemon of the target species or evolutionary line, preferably a female one. You can do this by catching it yourself in the wild, receiving it in trade, or being gifted it from an NPC. Every Pokemon can be obtained in different ways, so use your Pokedex or online resources to help you out. The reason we prefer a female parent is that the female Pokemon in a breeding pair is the one that passes its species down to the offspring. The exception to this rule being when a Pokemon is bred with Ditto, in which case the parent can be male or female or even genderless. Any breeding-capable Pokemon paired with Ditto will hatch a child that is of the non-Ditto species. If you find that your target is genderless, 100% male, or the game just isn't kind with the female spawning, don't be concerned. Breeding with Ditto is the simplest form of breeding possible, and they are luckily found in the wild of Paldea. In fact, they are in the same place as the Zorua female I'm going for, here in the area next to Medali. Both Zorua and Ditto are disguised as other Pokemon, so use your left trigger button to target them and see if the name reveals their true identity. Which brings us to step 3. Obtain a compatible breeding partner. As stated before, you can use any Pokemon from the same egg group for breeding, but this partner must be either the male gender or a Ditto. If the Pokemon you chose to breed for has no gender or is a species that is 100% male and isn't in the undiscovered egg group, you'll be required to breed with Ditto. What you choose to pair together will affect the chances at which eggs are received. Using a partner of a different species will give about a 3% chance of an egg appearing every minute. Using a partner of a different species from a different trainer will give about a 6% chance of an egg every minute. Using a partner with the same species will give about a 6% chance of an egg every minute as well. Using a partner with the same species from a different trainer will give about an 8% chance of an egg every minute. Note these percents are all before adding the egg powers you can get from sandwiches, which dramatically change the numbers, but the basic results are similar. Your fastest odds will always be breeding the same Pokemon together from 2 different original trainers. For this demonstration, I have caught both a male and female Zorua that have my trainer number, making the 6% per minute odds apply to me. Picnic to create an egg. We have chosen our parent Pokemon and its breeding partner now to actually breed them together. This is done by going into an area we can create a picnic in. I like to set up right outside Alfornada, but you may go wherever you like that the game allows. We open our menu with X, select our boxes, remove our party Pokemon, and replace them with the 2 parent Mons. Close the boxes, and then select Picnic. If you don't want to use egg powers, just stand around in your picnic or kick the ball with your buddies, and eventually you'll find an egg in the basket. Is this how I recommend breeding? No, absolutely not. But I did have to mention it as this is the most basic way to go about it. If you value your time a little more, then talk to the table and make an egg power sandwich. I usually go with number 17, the Great Peanut Butter Sandwich. It's very basic ingredients wise. Everything comes from these shops in Medali if you happen to not have the supplies, and each sandwich will run you 630 Poke. The sandwich will last 30 minutes, and as you can't really engage with a lot of things in game while you wait for eggs, I usually recommend watching something on another device or reading a book, cooking, exercise, basically any other activity that allow time to pass and distract you from the fact that breeding in this game is just standing at a table for a really long time. As an avid Pokemon breeder, I am disappointed in this, I will not lie. I did not earn these eggs, they just happen, and it upsets me, but my opinion is irrelevant, so back to it we go. Typically, I will check the basket every 3 to 5 minutes as it does cap out with a 10 egg capacity. If you don't remove any from time to time, you'll be missing out on more eggs. Once you have the amounts you want, whether that be only 1 or full boxes of them, leave the picnic and return to your boxes. You'll now have to add the egg to your party to complete step 5, hatch the target Pokemon. This is done by simply walking or riding around. Do note, egg power also speeds up the hatch rate for eggs slightly. You can also add a Pokemon with Flame Body, Magma Armor, or Steam Engine to your party to also half egg hatch time. And voila! a successfully bred Pokemon in just 5 fairly simple steps. But that's only the very basic version of breeding. I'm sure if you looked at the length of this video, you know I'm not nearly finished yet. But the rest of the things I'm going to get into are quite technical and really only apply to people who care about special forms or their Pokemon being inherently strong. The reality is, in Scarlet and Violet, there are ways to change almost all aspects of a Pokemon after obtaining it, which was not always the case in Pokemon games. To begin the complex section, let's take a look at all the aspects of a Pokemon you can affect via breeding, the most basic of which is the species of Pokemon that comes out of the egg, along with the form of that Pokemon if it has multiple, the chance of a shiny alternate colored Pokemon, the Pokeball the child Pokemon will come out of, its individual values which affect its overall stats, the ability and nature, the child's Tera Type, and finally, any egg moves it knows upon birth. Basically, every aspect of a Pokemon can be altered via breeding, even level technically, as all bred Mons come out at level 1. Of these aspects, the ones that are locked in upon creation of an egg and cannot be altered via items later are species, form, although some exceptions exist, we'll talk about that, Shinyness, and the Pokeball. The aspects that can be altered after birth via items are individual values by bottle caps at level 50 and up over in Montenevera, the ability, which can be capsuled for its alternate normal ability or patched to receive a hidden ability, natures, which can be minted into something else, Tera Types, which can be altered with special meals at the Treasure Eatery, and egg moves, which can be learned via Mirror Herb. Basically, all of the battle-affecting stats of a Pokemon are capable of being changed after the fact, so it's not necessarily required to breed a perfect Pokemon from the get-go, unless you want to save boatloads of money and items, or are like me and enjoy knowing your Pokemon is strong genetically without needing help. When I'm breeding a competitive level Pokemon, I usually follow this order for the process. So that's the order we're going to address things in. I have here a Hisuian Zora, which is male. If I breed it with the female parent we've been using, the child Zorba will all be Unova. If I want the child to be Hisuian, I'll need to use an Everstone. In breeding, a parent Pokemon holding an Everstone will pass down the genetics for its form to the offspring, whether that form is native to the region you are in or not. The Everstone holder can be the male or female, or even genderless when bred with Ditto. In Paldea, this method can be used to get all of the regional forms currently on screen. Be aware that if you have 2 different regionals and both hold Everstones, the mother will be the one to pass its form. In general, double Everstone breeding is not recommended. However, as we'll talk about more later, Everstones are also used to pass natures. So this method may be necessary if your parent of the correct form has the wrong nature. A subpoint of regional variant breeding is location breeding. If you own the Scarlet and Violet DLC, you'll have access to 3 distinct areas: mainland Paldea, Kitakami, and Blueberry Academy. Each of these places are their own region, thus influencing the regional forms available there in the wild and via breeding. Here's a chart of all the regional variants in Scarlet and Violet and what forms they will be when bred without Everstones in each area. Notice that Kitakami and Blueberry Academy give the standard version of each Pokemon, even though Alolan and Hisuian variants are available in the wild there. This is because those areas are not classified as Alola or Hisui. You'll want to keep this in mind when trying to breed these regional forms, as Everstones will be required. Several Pokemon come in a variety of vibrant colors: Flabebe, Squawkabilly, Oricorio, Tatsugiri, even Minior. What the parent looks like will directly influence the child Pokemon that hatches, in particular what the mother looks like. When breeding down colored forms, the mother's color is the only one that matters. If there are no females in the species, such as for Tauros, who has 3 different breeds in Paldea, then you'll breed with Ditto, in which case whatever color the non-Ditto Pokemon has will pass down. The same is true if there are females in the species, but you only have a male Pokemon. Ditto is your best friend. Do be aware that regional rules can still apply. So, Blaze Breed Tauros, bred in Kitakami or Blueberry, will give Cantonian Tauros, unless you use an Everstone, in which case it'll give you Blaze Breed Tauros. You won't need an Everstone to get a Blaze Breed child if you stick to breeding in Paldea. Also, White Striped Basculin is considered a color variant when breeding rather than a regional, even though it is native to Hisui. So no Everstones needed for the Gentle Fish. All the available colors are on screen now. A subpoint of colors and seasons, some Pokemon can change their form after being hatched, specifically Rotom and Oricorio. A parent Rotom, regardless of its form, will always give birth to a standard form Rotom. This form can then be changed using the Rotom catalog bought in Porto Marinada's auction house. The Rotom catalog is a key item with infinite uses, unlike the method to change Oricorio's form. When breeding, a parent Oricorio will pass its form to all of its offspring based on color rules. However, you can purchase nectars at Delibird Presents that can be used on an Oricorio to alter its form. If you don't want to purchase these nectars, they can also be found on Wild Oricorio of the corresponding color at a 5% rate. Breeding will always give the base Pokemon in an evolutionary line. This is actually a somewhat new concept, as now even species that have baby Pokemon that used to require holding an incense to receive no longer do. In fact, incenses aren't even available in Paldea. This does create a little bit of an annoying scenario, however, as these mons, which are still classified as baby Pokemon, are incapable of breeding. And most of them require high friendship to evolve. When incenses were a thing, you could breed, say, a ton of Marils not holding an incense and get more Marill parents rather quickly. Now you'll need to breed a good Azurill, evolve it to Marill to use for breeding the next generation, and then repeat with the next set of Azurill. In the grand scheme of things, this is not a big deal, but it is something to be wary of when picking a target or constructing a team. As you can only breed the child level of an evolutionary line, this does mean that Pokemon who evolve into split forms are mostly unaffected by breeding. Mons like Alcremie, Maushold, and a Dunsparce cannot be influenced through breeding mechanics. Their form is determined through special means. If you want more info on that, check out these videos, also on my channel. That's not to say there are 0 evolutionary forms that we can influence, because there are a few. Duskform Lycanroc is a special form available in raids. Rockruffs that become more Duskform are only obtainable through breeding a Duskform parent or Rockruffs with the Own Tempo ability. Toxtricity's form is based upon its nature, which we can guarantee using Everstone breeding. Sawsbuck's form is based on the season, which can breed down using color breeding. Gastrodon, Floette, and Florges colors are determined at the base evolution level, which we can influence during breeding. And finally, Poltergeist and Sinistcha will always be their fake forms if evolved from bred Pokemon, as authentic versions are not obtainable via breeding. Which leads us well into the next point. Some Pokemon cannot be bred at all, as discussed in the beginning of this video, because of their egg group being undiscovered, previously called the No Eggs group for obvious reasons. However, there are some breeding-compatible Pokemon that are unobtainable from breeding themselves, Sinistea and Poltergeist being one such set. You can breed the genderless cups with Ditto, both the authentic version and fake versions. However, every single child will be a fake, making the authentic and artisan cups completely unobtainable by breeding. Ditto itself is also unobtainable via breeding, even though it is compatible with every breedable Pokemon alive. All unbreedable Mons are on screen now. Moving away from forms and into Pokeball Genetics, The ball a Pokemon is stored in cannot be changed out later on. What you have is what you are stuck with, so if you like to match your Pokeballs to the vibe or aesthetic of your Pokemon, you're going to want to consider this info carefully. When breeding with the exact same species of Pokemon, both the male and female parent's Pokeball are taken into account, with the child having 50-50 odds of receiving either one if they differ. Note this only works with the exact same species, not the same evolutionary line. If one Pokemon is of a different evolution, even in the same line, then only the female Pokemon's ball is passed on 100% of the time. The same applies when breeding with a different species or with Ditto. As per usual with Dittos, whatever the non-Ditto ball is will be passed when breeding with males or genderless Pokemon. A special scenario exists for Pokemon appearing in Cherish Balls, which can be obtained from events, Strange Balls that appear on Pokemon transferred over from Legends Arceus, and any Pokemon caught in a Master Ball. These 3 ball types are not inheritable and will be converted to Pokeballs when breeding. The same rules apply as before, only convert any chances that would be these special balls into normal Pokeballs. Every Pokeball available in Scarlet and Violet is on screen now. Abilities are a special attribute of a Pokemon that can have a variety of effects. For example, it may change the weather, boost a certain stat, restore HP, and much more. Every Pokemon in the game is assigned at least one ability, with several species having access to 2 different abilities. However, even if a species has 2 abilities, each Pokemon is only allowed to have 1 active at a time. If you have, say, an Eevee, which has access to the abilities Runaway and Adaptability, and you check its status screen, you'll see it has one or the other, not both. If you wish to swap it to the other available ability, you'll need to use an item called an Ability Capsule, which can be obtained in high-level raids or from Chansey Supply for a ludicrous amount of Poké. You can also randomly print them at the item printer, which is the method I'd recommend. Note, I like sparkly things, so my opinion is 100% biased. Beyond this, Generation 5 introduced yet another ability option, with many Pokemon gaining a hidden ability on top of their already existing options. To get this rare ability requires finding them randomly on raid Pokemon or using an ability patch. An even rarer item available in the highest rating of naturally occurring raids, and the item printer again. Breeding down abilities is another aspect in favor of mother Pokemon, as only the female is considered when passing abilities on to offspring, unless you breed with Ditto, in which case fathers and genderless parents can pass their ability. In general, Pokemon inherit their mother's ability 60% of the time, with the other 40% split among the natural ability options. If a Pokemon species has only one ability, the child will receive that ability 100% of the time. If a Pokemon species has 2 abilities, then whichever one is on the mother will pass down 60% of the time, and the other 40% is split between Ability 1 and Ability 2, giving the mother's ability an effective inheritance rate of 80%, and the alternate ability a 20% rate. If you have a hidden ability on the mother and a species with only one normal ability, then the hidden is passed down 60% of the time, and the normal is passed 40% of the time. If you have a hidden ability on the mother and a species with 2 normal abilities, then the hidden is passed down 60% of the time, and normal ability 1 and normal ability 2 each have a 20% rate. If you have a hidden ability on the father and a normal ability mother, then the hidden will never be passed down. It must be on the mother when breeding a male and female together. To get around this, you'll be forced to use a Ditto to pass a male's hidden ability down with the same 60-40 split as before. The same goes for any genderless Pokemon. When it comes to what ability is passed down, the active ability is what matters. This means that even if you change a Pokemon's ability using an ability capsule or an ability patch, that new ability is considered the Pokemon's real ability for breeding. Do note, not every Pokemon has a hidden ability. Also, Own Tempo on Rockruff is considered a special ability, not a hidden ability, so cannot be obtained by ability patch. Rockruff is the only instance as of now of a Pokemon with 4 possible abilities that aren't caused by a gender split. Pokemon with gender split abilities include Meowstic, Indeedee, and Oink alone. Our next topic is the moves a Pokemon knows upon hatching at level 1. Certain moves that can be inherited during breeding, but aren't learned through level up by a child's species, are called egg moves. Traditionally, the only way to get these moves was by breeding with a parent from another species that did learn it from level up. For example, Raging Fury is an egg move for Growlithe. Growlithe does not learn it through level up at all, nor does Arcanine. So to get a Raging Fury Growlithe, I will need to breed with a compatible male from another species that does learn it. In this case, Infernape learns Raging Fury at 65 and is compatible with Growlithe as they share the field egg group. Pairing up a female Growlithe with our Infernape will get us a Raging Fury Growlithe. This is how egg moves have been passed down for generations. However, there is a new method in Scarlet and Violet that makes passing egg moves way simpler. If you purchase a Mirror Herb from Delibird Presents in Cascarapa, you can place it on the Pokemon you want to learn an egg move and add that Pokemon to your team. Then add a Pokemon knowing the desired egg move to your team as well. Delete a move slot on the Mirror Herb Pokemon if one isn't already empty, then take the two over to a nice picnic spot and place the table down. You can then pack up and leave right after. You don't even need to wait any amount of time. If you look at your Mirror Herb Pokemon, you'll see it now knows the egg move just like that. No sandwiches, no eggs, no hatching. Oh, so very simple. Just be aware that egg moves taught in this way are considered temporary. If the Pokemon forgets it, for whatever reason, you will not be able to relearn it. You'll have to use the Mirror Herb trick again to reteach the move. If you breed a parent Pokemon that knows a mirrored egg move, that move will be considered a legitimate egg move by the children, meaning if you make the child Pokemon forget it, they will be able to relearn it without needing a Mirror Herb. This method does have some other really nice mechanics. A Pokemon holding the Mirror Herb can mirror a move from any Pokemon, whether they are breeding compatible or not. The teacher can be the same gender, a different egg group, even a completely unbreedable Pokemon like the Paradoxes. It does not matter. If the move is compatible, it will learn it. Also, you can teach multiple egg moves at a time. If more than one Pokemon in your party has a compatible egg move, the Mirror Herb Pokemon will learn them in party order, followed by move order on the status screen, until all available move slots are full. So place the ones you wish to learn the most at the top of your party. Also new to Scarlet and Violet, because of this feature, is the ability of certain genderless Pokemon to have egg moves. Previously, they were only breedable with Ditto, and therefore could never have egg moves. That changes for a select few Pokemon, shown on screen now. Beyond egg moves that are specifically classed as such, there is another breeding mechanic to have level 1 Pokemon know grown-up moves. Unlike the egg moves we just discussed, these moves are in the Pokemon's natural moveset and therefore will be learned eventually. If you want a low-level Pokemon with really good moves to look cool or for something like a challenge run or to submit for a streamer's egg log, then this knowledge could be pretty useful. If you're breeding a male and female Pokemon together and both Pokemon know a move the child species learns by level up, then the eggs produced will inherit that move. Note, this does not work with Dittos or genderless Pokemon. They must be a male and female Pokemon. However, the male and female do not have to be the same species for it to work, so long as both know the move. This does mean that species that are 100% male can pass moves with this method, but will not produce more of their species as the female species passes down. There are certain Pokemon that can greatly benefit from this mechanic, the best example being the Dunsparce, which evolves from Dunsparce upon level up while knowing Hyper Drill. Normally, a Dunsparce learns Hyper Drill at level 32. However, by pairing a male and female Dunsparce or the Dunsparce that both know Hyper Drill together, we can create level 1 Dunsparce with Hyper Drill, which will evolve as soon as they make a single level, drastically decreasing the time it takes to evolve if you are hunting for the rare 3-segment form. The other Pokemon that evolve knowing specific moves, and therefore benefit from this mechanic, are on screen. Be aware that moves a child Pokemon inherits are learned in the following order. First, any level 1 moves, then any level up moves shared by the parents in level order, then any egg moves on the father Pokemon in summary screen order, and lastly, any egg moves on the mother Pokemon in summary screen order. Every Pokemon has 4 move slots available to them. In the event that the parent Pokemon can pass more than 4 moves down, the oldest known move will be replaced in the order I just showed. As an example, I have 2 Growlithe with these moves. To figure out what the child will have, I'll split the moves into the 4 categories: base, which is the level 1 moves, shared, male egg, and female egg. We'll now learn them in order. Leer, Ember, Flamethrower, Playrough, that's 4, Double Kick pushes out Leer, Morning Sun pushes out Ember, and finally Double Edge pushes out Flamethrower, leaving our child Pokemon with Playrough, Double Kick, Morning Sun, and Double Edge as shown now. This is how the priority order works for all move breeding. There's only one Pokemon that has an extra layer to egg moves, that being Volt Tackle Pichu, in which case Volt Tackle is added to the bottom of the inheritance list, so every Pichu that would be born knowing Volt Tackle always knows it, as it is learned last. To breed a Volt Tackle Pichu requires a Pikachu or Raichu to hold a light ball when breeding. If you need further details on how to get Volt Tackle Pichu, check this video here. Otherwise, that concludes the information on moves. In total, there exist 25 natures, each of which increases one stats growth by 10% at the cost of decreasing another stats growth by the same 10%. Notice the bold natures across the center diagonal. These both increase and decrease the same stat, therefore creating no change as the two cancel each other out. When you breed 2 Pokemon together, the resulting child will be assigned a nature at random of the 25 total available. If you wish to have a specific nature on a child Pokemon, you'll need to use an Everstone in much the same way we did for forms several minutes ago. You'll first need to find a parent with the nature you want, either in the wild or through randomly breeding. Be aware that the method of previous generations, where you could use a synchronized Pokemon to encounter these same natures in the wild, does not work in Scarlet and Violet, as out-of-battle effects are mostly disabled for these games. Personally, I have a box of breeding dittos with each nature so I can easily breed in what I need with Everstones. Then you'll just attach the Everstone to the parent with the nature you want, and it will be passed to all the resulting eggs. This works regardless of gender and even on Ditto. Everything can pass its nature via Everstone. If you breed with 2 Everstones, one on each parent, then the children will have a 50% chance at either nature in all cases. As stated in the regional form section, this fact can be used to get the nature you desire on a regional form, even if your original parent didn't have it, which is information a lot of trainers are not aware of. So, hey, now you know a niche breeding trick. Be aware that using mints to change a Pokemon's nature will not change the nature passed down during breeding. It will be their original nature. The only Pokemon as of now that evolves based on nature is Toxel, which becomes either amped or low-key form depending on the Pokemon's natural nature. This form cannot be changed by mints, meanwhile Everstone breeding can help you guarantee which form Toxel will evolve into. Another evolution that can be affected by natures, but is not dependent upon them, is Tyrogue, whose evolution is based upon its attack and defense stat. Having either a beneficial or a deficient nature in these 2 stats can change which evolution it becomes, although EVs and IVs will probably have a bigger influence on that than the nature will, which segues us into discussing IVs. IVs stand for individual values, which are essentially a Pokemon's stat genes. Each of the 6 stats on a Pokemon are assigned a value upon its creation from 0 to 31. This value determines how well that stat will grow upon leveling up, with 31 being the best and 0 being no good. In general, these values are hidden from the player. However, after beating the Pokemon League and seeing the credits, you can speak to a Pokemon Center nurse to unlock the Judge feature. This allows you to see a phrase by each stat, giving a general feel for how high or low their IV is. If you want a really strong Pokemon, the goal is usually to get what is known as a perfect Pokemon, one with 6 best on all its stats, meaning they are all at 31. This can happen in the wild, albeit extremely rarely. However, in most cases, your best bet will be to breed Pokemon for those perfect stats. When breeding Pokemon, 3 of the parent stats are chosen at random to pass their IV down. The 3 stats that are not selected to pass are then randomly assigned a value from 0 to 31. So if I have a parent with a perfect stat, the child will have a chance of also inheriting that stat. Be aware that when the game chooses this random 3 stats, it is picking from both parents. It could choose all 3 from the father, all 3 from the mother, 2 from dad and 1 from mom, or 2 from mom and 1 from dad. It's entirely random. Your best chance at passing on a perfect stat is to have both parents have that stat. To help with this, you can use a set of items called the power items. These hold items are typically used for increasing the number of effort values, or EVs, that a Pokemon receives when they gain experience from battles. As such, there exists one for each stat. If you have a parent Pokemon hold one of these items, the corresponding IV will always be passed to the offspring. Whether the parent holding the item is male or female, genderless or a ditto, power items will work. If you have more than one stat you wish to pass on, you can breed with 2 power items. However, this will not guarantee both stats are passed on. What will happen is the game will choose between the 2 power items. Whichever it picks, that stat will be passed on. This will take one of the 3 inherited stat slots. The other 2 inherited stats will be randomly chosen, like normal. If the game decides the child will inherit the stat that corresponds to the opposite power item, then the item holder's IV value will also be inherited. I know that sounds a bit complicated, but in a basic sense, this is most useful if your parent Pokemon have different perfect IVs, as it can more easily narrow the inheritance of those IVs by excluding the opposite parent's stat. If your parent Pokemon have many good IVs between them, then breeding with the Destiny Knot will be more beneficial to you. If any Pokemon holds a Destiny Knot, the pair will pass down 5 IVs to the offspring instead of the usual 3, meaning only one stat is chosen at random from 0 to 31. This makes getting high IV and perfect Pokemon a lot easier. If you've managed to get offset best stats, meaning they aren't on both parents, you can use a power item and the Destiny Knot together to guarantee one stat and randomly select 4 of the remaining 5 stats from the parents. At which point, it's just continue pairing up the best IV offspring until eventually you get matching 5 IV parent, which will then breed together for a 6 IV offspring. In all reality, a 6 IV Pokemon is somewhat unnecessary. Most Pokemon are either physical or special attackers, so having a 5 IV Pokemon that favors the species' attack preference is just as good as a full 6 IV Pokemon, as you'll most likely not be teaching it moves with the non-favorable attacking type. There are of course exceptions to this, but in general, going for 5 IVs takes less time and will still serve you pretty well. If you want to skip ahead in IV breeding, you can catch high IV parents through Tera raids. Every Tera raid is guaranteed 1 perfect IV for 1 to 2 star, 2 for 3 star, 3 for 4 star, 4 for 5 star, and 5 for 6 star. The last IV for 6 star raids is random, making there effectively be a 1 in 32 chance that it can be a 6 IV Pokemon. I mentioned before that IVs are an aspect that can be altered after birth. This is done through hyper training on Pokemon that are level 50 and up. Giving this guy in Montenevera a bottle cap will make the Pokemon stats act as though they have a 31 in it, although this change is only applicable for the purpose of battling. If breeding with a hyper-trained Mon, the original IV value is passed to any offspring. But if you are looking to have high stats for battles, hyper-training will save you a lot of time. If you need something like a 0 stat in speed for a Trick Room team, then breeding remains necessary. Or want a 0 attack stat for less damage from confusion or foul play, then breeding is still relevant for that too. But if you're going for the max, unless you seriously care about your mons being inherently genetically strong, just use the bottle caps. It'll save you a ton of time at the cost of a few thousand Poké Dollars. In Scarlet and Violet, the standard chance of coming across a shiny Pokemon, either spawning in the wild or hatching from an egg, is 1 in 4,096. If you manage to complete the Paldean Pokedex, you can grab yourself a shiny charm, which gives 2 extra chances at finding a shiny, making the new rate 1 in 1,365. If you use a breeding technique known as the Masuda method, named after Junichi Masuda, you'll be 6 times more likely to encounter a shiny Pokemon, giving a new rate of 1 in 683. This effect can also be stacked with the shiny charm for the lowest rate possible at 1 in 512. If you wish to take advantage of these superior rates, you'll need to get your hands on a foreign Pokemon. A foreign Pokemon is one that originates from a different language game file. When you first begin your Pokemon journey, the game prompts you to pick one of the 9 language options: English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Simplified Chinese, or Traditional Chinese. Whichever option you pick becomes your game's language, both in the text you'll read and also in the genetics of any Pokemon you create, either by capture or breeding. As such, foreign Pokemon will need to be obtained from other trainers. If you want more specifics on methods to get one, check out this video. You'll know if a traded mon is from another language by looking beside its name in the boxes or on the summary screen. Once you have a different language Pokemon, it really is as simple as pairing it with a Pokemon from your own language and making eggs till eventually one is shiny. Remember, the odds are still either 1 in 683 or 1 in 512 with shiny charm, so this could take a while. Do note that you can breed 2 Pokemon from foreign languages together to get this increased rate as well, so long as those foreign languages are not the same. Breeding shiny Pokemon really is all about luck, and I wish you the best if shinies are your goal. Our last section is Tera Types, which are really simple. A baby Pokemon will not inherit its Tera Type from the parents. Rather, it will be determined by the child's species. If a child Pokemon is of a monotype, all eggs will have that Tera Type. If the child Pokemon is of a dual type, then the eggs will have a 50-50 chance of either Tera Type. If you want a Tera Type that isn't of the baby Pokemon's type, you will need to change it at the Treasure Eatery in Medali using 50 Tera Shards of your desired Tera typing. Be aware that a Pokemon retains its Tera Type upon evolution, meaning that mons like Eevee that can become other types upon evolving are stuck with their child Tera until you change it with Tera Shards. That concludes all of the information on affecting the characteristics of bred Pokemon. I know it was a lot of information. I hope if you watched all the way through, you found this helpful in some way. But there is one last thing to discuss that is actually exclusive to Paldea as of now, and that's multibreeding. In all previous generations, only 2 Pokemon could breed at a time, but you can have a full team of Pokemon at a picnic in Paldea, meaning a possible 9 breeding pairs in one party of Mons if you work your egg groups correctly, or, use Dittos. In fact, it can go even higher than that in multiplayer, as up to 4 friends can union circle together. When they join a picnic, their leading Pokemon accompanies them, so that's upwards of an additional 3 breedable Pokemon. Every Pokemon in a picnic, regardless of who brought it, will be considered for valid breeding pairs. If a pair is found, then every player will be able to find eggs resulting from that pairing. If multiple pairs are found, the chances of an egg from each valid pair is split equally among them. Be aware that when multibreeding, the game will check if you have a Destiny Knot or Everstone on your Pokemon. If you do, that Pokemon will be locked in as the parent for breeding. Only valid breeding pairs that include the item-holding Pokemon will then be allowed to breed together, while all other pairings are ignored. If you put multiple Destiny Knots or Everstones on eligible Pokemon, you will receive eggs from only those specific Pokemon if any of them create a valid pair. If none of the item-holding Pokemon are compatible with each other, you will never receive eggs. These rules apply to all Pokemon within a picnic, regardless of who owns them. So if a friend brings in an Everstone-holding Pokemon, every other picnicking trainer will only receive eggs bred using that Pokemon. Make sure you are wary of what mons have items and which do not. If you need more details on how this works, I explain it more and have examples in this video. If you are using egg powers to speed up the process of receiving eggs, be aware that the boost it gives only applies to you personally. If you are in multiplayer and didn't make a group sandwich for the buff, then the other players will need to find their own method of getting egg power. As with all sandwich powers, if you put your console on the home screen, it will pause the timer on your egg power. So long as you keep your game suspended, you can take a break and return a while later to resume breeding. There are more very niche things about breeding that I could get into, like gender splits, hatching methods, items near a picnic, where to get specific rare forms in game, the compatible forms that aren't natively in Scarlet and Violet, but for the sake of my sanity and yours, I'm stopping here. There's a playlist with much smaller videos that go over each of these things, as well as what I did discuss here in a more relaxed and focused way. I recommend if you didn't understand something to check out the smaller lesson on it. Thank you for watching my guide. Much luck in your breeding journey, and as always, have a lovely day.